You're listening to Schmidt Talks, the podcast wing of schmidttalks.com, with writer and blogger Heather Christena Schmidt. With a new episode each week, Schmidt talks about all the things you never knew you needed to hear about in these truly dystopian times. From politics and current events to life and living, Heather covers it all in this philosophical and introspective show. Come back every Monday for a new episode and get more info on Heather and her work at schmidttalks.com. And now for the show.
Welcome to Schmidt Talks, the podcast wing of my long-running blog at schmidttalks.com. My name is Heather Christena Schmidt. I am a mom, a writer, and a critic of, everything. I have degrees in political science, philosophy, public administration, and I ran for city council in 2020, at the height of the earliest days of the COVID-19 pandemic. A little housekeeping, and if you've been around a while, you know I like to start my episodes for now with this. I'm relatively new to podcasting, so if you notice changes here or there, little tweaks and such, it's because I'm working out the kinks. If you have suggestions, please head to my website and click contact, or slide into my DMs on your social media platform of choice. Give me all of your thoughts. I love constructive criticism and tips. I decided to do this podcast in seasons, and each season has a theme. This first season is Words Matter. We are living in truly dystopian times, and I believe that a lot of it has to do with the loss of meaning to our words. Nobody really means what they say anymore. Today's episode in particular will go into something that is swirling around political circles. The concepts of conservative and liberal. So it's actually two words this week. Each episode I like to keep short and sweet. 30 minutes or less. I like them short. That way we can get to the heart of the topic, make the points, and leave you all with more to think about for the conversation to continue. This is, after all, just a starting point. Today's episode, as I said, is actually two words. Conservative and liberal. So the other day, my husband and I were talking about Joe Biden. You know, our middle America president from Scranton, the most relatable president in American history, blah, blah, blah. What the liberals say is the most progressive president in American history. What conservatives say is a socialist plant taking down the country with some bizarre Pizzagate conspiracy from QAnon. Now, this is the only time I'm going to refer to them, Democrats and Republicans, as exclusively liberals and conservatives. My husband, who isn't really up on politics and nuance, said he agrees. Joe Biden is pretty progressive. After all, look at that student loan forgiveness and that infrastructure package. But for people that pay attention to the nuance and pay attention to the details, you see the failures of the student loan forgiveness program. You see the objectively narrow group of beneficiaries in the infrastructure package. And it's in policies like that that you know that this is a disingenuous way to claim that Joe Biden is progressive. He's not. There is nothing further from the truth. Joe Biden is not progressive. He's not even a liberal, at least in the sense that we're starting off with. Joe Biden is to the right of impeached President Richard Nixon. He is to the right of British Donald Trump, former Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Just think about that for a minute. Richard Nixon, Watergate. When inflation began spiraling out of control and it was clear that his economy was headed for a downturn as a result, Nixon signed an executive order to immediately freeze prices. Joe Biden, faced with worse inflation than this country has seen in decades, with 71% of Americans saying that the basic costs of living are now outpacing their paychecks, Joe Biden will not even consider the measure, favoring the profits of his corporate donors over the ability for people to pay rent and put food on their table. Joe Biden is to the right of Richard Nixon. By this measure alone, we really need no other argument to prove to us that he is anything but a conservative. And of course, we have plenty of other things we can point to. The crime bill he's so famous for, his racist policies as a senator, his treatment of Anita Hill to the benefit of conservative Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas, even his policies with COVID, outright murdering. And yeah, I'm saying it's murder now because they are preventable. And a lot of liberal Democrats will say, well, it's the Republicans, the anti-vaxxers, but it's not. Murdering 700,000 Americans by rejecting the science in favor of airline CEOs, big pharma, clearing the way to again make Medicare solvent as some sick, insidious, but nonetheless consequential benefit. That is what Joe Biden excels at, winning by harming and shrugging his shoulders. Joe Biden is in reality a conservative. But does anyone else agree? Again, I guess it depends on what you mean when you say conservative. So when people traditionally say someone is a conservative, and I'm sure that I've lost a lot of people at this point by calling Joe Biden conservative, but he is. He is not a liberal and he is not a progressive. Two very different things in and of themselves. But when people say someone is a conservative, they mean Republican. And likewise, a lot of times people say liberal and they mean Democrat. But I really don't agree with those definitions. As the title of our season goes, words matter. And if we dissect these words for what they mean, it is really hard to argue that all Republicans are conservative, that all Democrats are liberal, or as we'll see, that either is anything but both. So we already established this with Joe Biden, but there are other Democrats that favor conservative or centrist views, arguably the vast majority of them, right? I don't have official polling data on this, but the amount of support for Joe Biden within the Democratic Party, even when he capitulates to the likes of Joe Manchin and Kristen Sinema, it's staggering. More to the point, the Democratic Party's camp has their own version of like a MAGA. These right-wing crazies, only they're on the left wing. They spend all their time on the internet trolling for people to spew their party lines at. It is extremism, and it is the very definition of being a conservative. It was crazy too, because initially the joke was that when, Biden was elected, we didn't have flags and hats and memes to worship him the way that the MAGA Trumpists did to Donald Trump. But now, less than 2 years into his presidency, for every FJB or Let's Go Brandon Trump 2024 flag you see, there is a dark Brandon meme. There is a whole army of internet groupies with profile pictures of Kamala and Joe. It's worship. It is extreme. And it is conservatism. It's just in the Democratic Party's side. These are the same people that defend Biden's failure to truly fulfill his campaign commitments, who belie the commitments. Then they turn to blame their own progressive caucus for approval ratings and join the group of people that argue against things like student loan forgiveness. We've established that Joe Biden is a conservative here, but really speaks volumes is that the vast majority of his supporters, the Democratic Party, well, they're all pretty damn conservative too. This is because being conservative isn't a political party. It is a set of values that you espouse. It's something totally not political. I used to think I was conservative because I didn't wear low-cut tops that showed my cleavage. Because I blushed when I talked about a relationship stuff. Because I preferred to not get gropey with boyfriends in public, things like that. I thought that made me conservative. Because I held my hands in my lap at the dinner table. Being conservative is about having particular values. Of course, I think most of that is stupid now. Some demure illusion I had of myself, that came from growing up in the Midwest in a religious community. But more to the point, it highlights the fact that These values that define conservatism, they don't define a political party. No matter how much Republicans try to call themselves the Republican, the party of values or the party of family values, it is conservatism that exists in both parties, the Democrats and the Republicans, that articulate and define what it is to be a conservative for us. And the same goes for being liberal. It is so much more difficult for me to describe or define a liberal. As we said, it does not mean Democrat, because there are more centrist and conservative Democrats in absolute numbers than otherwise. And they endorse canceling and turning on anyone that dissents. The very definition of conservative and extreme ideology is to eliminate anything that does not espouse your values. Does that mean that Republicans and Democrats are both conservative parties? I mean, I would argue yes. And so who or what is a liberal? How do we then differentiate? Because there seem to be degrees of Republicans, the conservative values ones, and the bulk that have sided with the MAGA, the right-wing fascism, the conservative Democrats could only dream to one day become. Because make no mistake about it, and as we have established in a previous episode, the Democrats and their leader Joe Biden, they are fascist. They are conservative and fascist. They're just not as effective as the Republicans are. They're not as overt. I can't even argue that the likes of the so-called squad, that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, and the Ilhan Omars of the Democratic Party, that they define for us being liberal. Because even though they speak up more often than the rest, they still fall in line. They still fall in step with the party, even when it is overtly conservative ideology that they are advancing. And all that stuff about women's rights, the supposed protest and arrest in high heels and coordinated pantsuits, come on. They have capitulated on their core issues time and time again when they saw the bigger picture and remembered that they still have corporate donors to appease. This is what it means to be conservative. To have the value that sometimes you look the other way. They have gone all in on legislation to suppress third parties. Suppression, a conservative value. Other Democrats have as well. Even Ocasio-Cortez, she still vacations in Florida and drives a Tesla. These are values. Again, the values of being conservative we are seeing in both the Republican Party and the Democratic Party. Even the Democratic Party that claims itself to be progressive and liberal. So we get it, right? Like, everybody is a conservative to some degree. It's like they all have conservative values at certain points or on certain topics, even if they don't admit it. But again, what does it mean to be liberal then? Who are the liberals? Are there liberals? So it gets really hard to find an ostensive definition of a liberal in this context when you really look at being a conservative not as being a part of a political party, but being a set of values. So if I do a simple Google search or a dictionary search, I get some definitions about liberal. Some of them make a little bit of sense. Honestly, I cannot for the life of me. And I've lived my whole life in America. So I can't really think or point to anyone that defines liberal for me. So either there is none or it's an abstract concept. So the first definition that I find on this concept of liberal is, quote, willing to respect or accept behavior or opinions different from one's own, open to new ideas. Now, the Democratic Party is certainly not that. So I think it would be disingenuous to call Democrats liberals for that reason. Now, Republicans are definitely not willing to respect or accept behavior or opinions different from one's own. If the GOP does anything successful, it is fall in line. The Democratic Party, they eliminate anyone that does not, just not as successfully. So I know that certainly is not the Democratic Party. And I also have firsthand experience as a former city council candidate who ran as an endorsed Democrat. I also worked for the Democratic Party for years prior to that, on and off. And in a variety of capacities. I even worked on a primary presidential campaign for Evan Bayh for a short period of time on his field campaign here in the Southwest. And this did not change the fact that as soon as, after my own candidacy at the city council race in 2020 was over, I started openly expressing my views that were different from the official ones of the party. I was informed that they did not respect or accept my opinions. And I was canceled. And I hate to invoke that type of terminology because I think that in our culture, we, argue about cancel culture, and it seems to be something that the Republicans also complain about, and then the Democrats complain about it. The book banning is canceling, and then the Republicans are complaining about the canceling of, TV shows for racial reasons or whatever. That's not what I'm trying to invoke here. I'm actually saying that, my membership was canceled. I was kicked out. I was kicked out of every single Democratic group that I was in. I was blocked by local Democrats. Today, I am still blocked by them on a regular basis. A few that are running for office now themselves went full-on mean mug mommy group on me and smeared the hell out of me. One man, more recently, who considers himself somewhat high up in the local party, even though he doesn't even know all the candidates that are up for a re-election this year, he called me a danger to democracy. And I think I've mentioned that on one of my previous episodes, a danger to democracy. His claim was that I was too progressive in my thinking. I am too divergent in my principles from the parties. And he said I was a danger to question the decisions of Joe Biden. He was unwilling to respect or accept opinions or behaviors of someone different from their own. So no, the Democratic Party is not liberal. At least in that sense, they are not willing to respect or accept behavior or opinions different from one's own. And in the same sense, the GOP is not either. Okay, so the next definition that comes up is relating to or denoting a political or social philosophy that promotes individual rights, civil liberties, democracy, and free enterprise. And this is there's 20 versions of this one. And I think both of the main political parties claim to be the ones for those principles. We know that. They both claim that they are the defenders of democracy, the true defenders of democracy. They are the true defenders of America, of individualistic rights, of free enterprise. So this isn't what it means to be liberal, not in the political sense. Or maybe only in the political sense. Only in the political sense does it mean to be liberal. And it is both political parties that have these values. And then they also, at the same time, have conservative values. And you would think that this somehow would negate each other in some logically fallacious way. But it starts to come very clear here that when we start to get definition after definition after definition of liberal and conservative, none of it really applies unanimously to Democrats or unanimously to Republicans. But what it does apply to, in some sense of the term, is both. Democrats are conservative, both in their political ideologies as well as just their general values. In the same ways I was demure about my shirt choices, Democrats are calculating. They are callous in their policy making. They are all about appearances. They are focused on their corporate donors. They are conservative. But they're also liberal in a different way. We're left with table scraps, though, to understand what it means to be liberal, a relative perspective. For me, it then comes down to, when do I use the term liberal and it's not about politics? And I think about when I worked in a pharmacy and we dispensed something like a cream with directions that said, liberally apply to affected area. Or I think about this group that we used to have called Drinking Liberally. And it was like a play on words where you were supposed to go and talk about progressive politics and have a beer or two or whatever. But a lot of people thought it just meant drinking a ton of alcohol. Liberal in this sense means a lot. It means excessive. It means generous amounts. I wouldn't say that describes Democrats or Republicans, though at the same time, I think it describes both. They both are a lot. They both are excessive. They both are extreme. They are both generous in their amounts for each other and themselves, for their corporate donors. They are extreme in their ideologies. They are liberal in their ideologies, but not in their values. Political parties breed extremism. When I think of liberally applying things, I think of doing it in an extreme way. Political parties breed a lot, and that is what it means to be liberal. A lot. Democrats and Republicans they're both conservatives and liberals in my view. It's wrong to say that a liberal is a Democrat and a conservative is a Republican. That's wrong. They are both conservatives and Republicans. The two concepts are not actually mutually exclusive. They're talking about different things altogether, or concepts. In reality, these words, they mean completely different ideas or different aspects of what it means to be, political or in that way. They are about completely different ideas. Liberal is describing a way of doing politics. Conservative is a way of describing the specific values that they build their politics upon. And I think that this distinction is so important because it explains how everyone else gets left out and left behind. Those that do not identify as either party, that are in some obscure party like Peace and Freedom or Libertarian or whatever, or are no party preference, which is the growing trend in America, the issues voters. What are they? Well, they aren't liberal or conservative, that's for sure. Or a lot of times they don't espouse both, so they don't identify as a Democrat. You don't identify as a Democrat if you don't, believe in the Democrats' conservative values in a liberal extreme way. You don't identify as a Republican if you don't believe in the Republicans' conservative values in a liberal extreme way. Sometimes you'll find people that believe in conservative values, and this is what I experienced in my city council campaign, the no party preference voters, they all, they either believed in the conservative Republican values, but they didn't agree with being extreme about it. Or they were ideologically opposed to the conservative Republican values. They agreed with things the Democrats agreed in, the conservative views of the Democrats. But they also didn't believe in the extremism of parties. Or, there was a third group too, which is that a lot of people, they believed in no conservative values. Democratic Party conservative, not GOP conservative. They were actual progressives, and they still believed in extremism. They believed in liberal extreme measures to make progressive change. But words matter, right? And we want to place some kind of a label on all of these. Well, I think it's disingenuous to even do that. We cannot, in good faith, just call Democrats liberals and the GOP conservatives. They are both. So the next time you see some idiot say that they're doing something to own the GOP, or more commonly to own the libs, I only saw recently somebody say that they were doing something to own the GOP. He was saying that he would willingly get and spread COVID if it meant infecting someone who was an anti-vaxxer. It was very disturbing. And it is extreme. And it was not owning anyone but himself. And I think that applies to both Democrats and Republicans, to the liberal and conservatives in both parties. They are owning themselves. So I always get so offended when people call me a liberal, and I never really understood why. And at the same time, anytime I criticize Joe Biden, the Democrats come out en masse and accuse me of being a conservative, and that offends me too. And it finally occurred to me that the reason why it both bother me is because I don't identify in either way. Being conservative is about having a value system on a scale, and both parties have it. Both parties are conservative. Being liberal just means being extreme, and I don't really agree with being extreme either. So I'm neither a liberal nor a conservative, and I guess my question is, are you?
You've been listening to Schmidt Talks, the podcast wing of schmidttalks.com, with writer and blogger Heather Christena Schmidt. With a new episode each week, Schmidt talks about all the things you never knew you needed to hear about in these truly dystopian times. Thank you for listening, and make sure to come back every Monday for a new episode. You can get more info on Heather, her social media channels, and all of her work at schmidttalks.com. Stay safe.